We are live and recording. Hello, hello. For those who don't know me, my name is Jake Stika. I'm the executive director of an organization called Next Gen Men. One of our initiatives is Equity Leaders, where we bring conversations around diversity, inclusion, and gender equity into male-dominated workplaces. Part of our framework is 1, we believe in diversity because it's a fact. 2, we behave inclusively because it's an act. And 3, we become equitable because it's an outcome. So that's kind of the framework we're going to be having our conversations through. Normally, if we were in person, we would do a quick little land acknowledgement. In this new digital world, it gets hard to do that sometimes with folks dialing in from all kinds of spaces. I know myself and Lisa, who I'll introduce here shortly, are on 2 different lands. So we've been holding space for an idea around truth and reconciliation. And in light of this being Mental Health Week of Mental Health Month and the conversation we're about to have together, I just want to hold space for the fact that Indigenous peoples in Canada have experienced a lot of trauma. A lot of mental health support is very inaccessible, especially in those communities, especially when we think about, price point just for the average person and whatnot. So, holding those traumas in mind that have existed, continue to exist, and the help that isn't always there, that's an intention that I want us to think about. Those of you who are joining us on the line here, I see 12 people currently. You'll see a chat box on the right side of your screen. Feel free to drop us a note there. Let us know where you're joining us from. We want to see where everyone's dialing in from. And then as you're exploring the chat box there, there's a plus sign by the chat box as well. And you'll see underneath that you can ask a question. So as Lisa and I are going to be dialoguing for 30 minutes or so, and you have a burning question, feel free to plop that in there, and then at the end we'll make sure that we have some time for Q&A. All right, so we got Jamie from Edmonton. Hello, and we'll wait as people trickle in. And while we're waiting for people to trickle in there, I'm going to take the opportunity to introduce my good friend. To me, she's Lisa. To you, she's Dr. Lisa Belanger, who is the CEO of ConsciousWorks, a behavior change expert. That means that she's a researcher, an author, and an award-winning CEO. She delivers proven success from working with hundreds of leaders, entrepreneurs, and athletes, incorporating simple life habits for creating radical long-term change. Dedicated to creating positive change within companies and individual lives, Lisa is at the forefront of delivering the latest in behavioral science into approachable content for increasing happiness, productivity, and overall well-being, which I can attest to from the many conversations that we've had. And highlighting that adverse habits can easily accumulate throughout life, slowly interrupting and depleting our performance and causing issues such as lack of motivation, decreased engagement and productivity, depression, memory loss, and anxiety, causing a ripple effect through all areas in life. That sounds like some of my weeks during this pandemic. And ConsciousWorks creates awareness of problematic habits, empowering individuals to integrate simple steps for radical long-term life change. Welcome, Lisa.
Thanks for having me.
And then we have Nancy from Calgary, Andrea from the Bay Area, Brian from Michigan, and Joanna from Chicago. This is great. We got people from all over. I'm very excited. So it being Mental Health Week of Mental Health Month, I'm overwhelmed as well with how many days and weeks and months we have to pay attention to these days. But it's a great time to be having these conversations because, we're 5 months maybe-ish into 2020, so it might as well be mental health year with all of the things that we experienced. One thing that you bring up that I love is this idea of proactive mental health, right? Like there's this big concept of health and well-being or the healthcare system, but oftentimes it's after the fact. It's when something bad has happened. Even with the truth and reconciliation component, how can we be proactive in taking care of our mental health, and how can and should organizations support their staff to take advantage of that idea during these strange times?
I think what's interesting about the pandemic is it's really put like this magnifying glass on our behaviors, on our habits, because a lot of our routine has been changed. A lot of it looks a little bit more, or has to be a little bit more conscious right now. So we don't have these built-in breaks of walking down the hall and going to see so-and-so or going to the coffee place. Like we have to consciously, like, we need a break and go out and do something. And for that reason, I think it's actually a particularly interesting time to talk about the proactive nature of mental well-being. So again, like, I think you made a really good point on that idea that often when we say mental health, we mean mental illness. And what I mean by proactive mental health is that there's so many of our daily, seemingly small habits that impact how we work, how we feel, how we're able to perform. And so when we think of during the pandemic, so much of us are behind a screen for an unprecedented amount of time. We're sitting for longer than we ever have. We're moving less. And as we were talking about right before the call, the average workday of the American has increased from 2 to 3 hours on average. On average. So what we have is this work seeping into every aspect of life. What we have is not necessarily an effective recovery between bouts of work and stress, which is so important for our overall well-being, but specifically for our mental well-being. And so I think companies being able to take this lens and support people and educate people on how and what habits matter and how we can integrate them, and how we can integrate them in a really stressful time, because that becomes a little bit more challenging as well, but it's possible. So I think having these conversations is so important. I've seen more of them now than ever before. So that's really encouraging. But can we get systematic about it? Can we rely on the evidence? Can we say, okay, this is what we know makes our brain function well. How do we integrate it given the constraints of COVID-19?
Totally. And a slight plug to one of our previous guests, David Ogle. I've been thinking about this a lot since my conversation with him. He talks about habit discontinuity, right? Kind of that neuroscience approach that he has. And as we've kind of moved through, one form of habit discontinuity from the old normal into this period of time, we're also going to experience another period of habit discontinuity as the restrictions lift and we go back into the real world, quote unquote. And what would you say we should maintain from this period of time around that proactive mental health piece, so that we don't lose it once we kind of try and shed those new habits?
I think the biggest thing is that I'm actually really excited about is agility. So when you're talking about how we develop habits and how intertwined they are with who we are and how we function, and then being able to get into a new state, which is this work from home for most of us, and then have to kind of build habits from scratch that hopefully people are taking a conscious approach to. You can take some of those that you're noticing work. So as an example, one of the most effective breaks is to be out in nature. And working from home, you may have more access to that than working from your office. In saying that, is there creative ways to bring that in? Are there accessibility points when you go back to the office? But on top of that, when we think about both habits and mental well-being, is we're going into a state of uncertainty. Even if the doors open again, we don't know if there's a second wave. We don't know about financial and job security always. And there's a lot of rapid change that has happened and will continue to happen because of this pressure. We have no idea what the economy is going to look like. So being able to understand how you can thrive on change and how you can keep nimble and agile when it comes to your belief systems and your habits, and like, okay, that didn't work, now what? Right? Okay, that's not the same. That's not working for me, or what have you. Okay, what can I do? Right? So being able to keep that agility as we go forward, because it is going to be uncertain. It's not going to be a solid ground for quite some time. Can we learn to function there, and can we learn to thrive there without that solid ground?
I love the word agility. I mean, it seems so counterintuitive to just a lot of organizations, because like you think about someone introducing a new idea and they always come back with, well, that's how we always done it. And that's like the absolute opposite of agility, right? So I think that's a really great word to carry through this. You know, this situation is impacting all of us similarly, but also dissimilarly, right? There's some of us who have the privilege and the opportunity to go and work from home. There's unfortunately, you know, essential workers who are out there fighting the good fight on behalf of the rest of us. And then there's some people who their way of working and being just doesn't really exist anymore. But another nuance to this, and this is kind of where that next gen men and equity leaders lens comes in, is that gender dynamic, right? It plays out in so many different ways. If we look at logistics, you know, 98% of truck drivers are men, so they're doing their work. And then on the flip side of that, 76% of healthcare workers are women, and so they're doing their end of the work, and what that looks like in the workplace at home. And you know, from conversations that we've had, I know that you're you know, a role model to me as far as like a professional woman and all of the things you achieve and all of the richness in your life. How is this period of time affecting professional women differently than maybe other people?
I think it's really, I find the topic absolutely fascinating. And to be very clear, this is more anecdotal in conversations I've had with a ton of professional women over the last little while. The research will slowly come out on this, right? But it's an unprecedented time that people are expected to do childcare, possibly teaching, and a full-time job on top of each other. Now, that is not saying it's female specific, but the stats say that the majority of that is falling on the woman, regardless of what the position is that she holds, regardless of the family dynamic. It's really falling on mom. And there's already, like, we know there's a gender pay gap, but the biggest gap is actually a mother tax. It's less than 10% if you're a non-mom, and almost 30% if you are a mother. This is going to be exaggerated in the next little while. And it's so disheartening to hear people say, how can I show value to my company when I'm also parenting and there's kids around? And I've never ever heard, none of my male counterparts have asked the same question. And so there's dynamics going on in the household that are now being put to the forefront. And there's exponential amount of challenges put on females, particularly mothers, for exactly this. And it's heartbreaking, to be honest. It is asking people to do what is inhumane, to work essentially at least 2 full-time jobs, if not 3, at the same time. And we're also, like, the messaging from companies, the messaging from the government's like, take care of yourself. And I'm talking to people and they're like, when? Like, good note. I understand that helps me. When am I supposed to do it? And I think that the HUT needs to be discussed more. It needs to be supported more. We need to get more creative with our ideas. And somebody put in the chat box, and I completely agree, I think work environments are going to become more employee friendly. But how do we get there? Because right now they're horrific. I have been polling companies to try to figure out how they're supporting parents during this. And I would say damn near 99% of them aren't. They're just not. And they're expecting either the same thing, or they'll say, don't worry, you can work flexible hours. So you're getting emails from 4 a.m. from a mom and at 11 p.m. Like, that is not sustainable. It's not an approach we can work with. And now we have doors opening before childcare. This has not been thought through. And I think one of the most terrifying things are that people are getting through it. They're managing, but there's going to be a fallout. So we're in survival mode. We get through it, but then what? Yeah. And so it's something that I'm raising a lot in discussion, and I really hope we start thinking a little bit differently about.
Yeah, totally. And that flexible hours piece is like the same criticism that a lot of the government programs face, especially around, let's say, like rent relief or something like that, where they say, oh, you can defer rent for up to 3 months. And it's like, that doesn't actually help me, because then I owe 4 months of rent at once, right? I'm actually further in the hole. And that's essentially what I think flexible workplace policies often do, is it's not actually lessening the burden. You have to play catch up at the end anyways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm trying to get women to learn the art of saying no, and, deferring, and really managing your own expectations of other, but doing it in a strategic way. Because we know doing that, and we know based on research, being able to say no and deferring and being able to only pick up when you can handle, you are more respected by your peers. You're able to kind of really be essential in what you're doing and prioritize, instead of, and then I get women coming, and how can we volunteer? And I'm like, don't, like, this is not the time to pick that up. I'm a huge fan of volunteerism. It's fantastic in so many different ways, but it's something that, the idea of you actually have to take care of yourself first is being put so far in the background, that I'm hoping that we can kind of mitigate this going forward and think, like I said, more critically about it, more creatively about it, on how we can support. And I was saying to you before the call, like, I want to do like a job skill analysis. I have a 3-year-old and a 6-month-old. The amount of skills and different things that I've learned that are literally a competitive advantage during this time should be communicated to employers, right? Parents have a skill set and develop a skill set that is paramount to business. It's a matter of how we show it and how we can articulate it. Yeah.
Totally. And I love that idea of the job skills analysis. It brings me back to thinking of a session we just recently did. One, like, basically a role model of mine, he took paternity leave, and the way that he framed it for himself was not like a loss or a setback or those kinds of things, but he looked at his partner and he saw her growth in terms of multitasking, logistics,
Yeah.
Communication, et cetera, et cetera. And so he wrote those things down. He's like, this is like a secondment to get these new skills, right? And I think if as organizations we can look at that,
Yeah.
we're going to have a whole richer pool of people to pull from as we, I constantly hear the talent gap, but like, we're not actually measuring people's real skills.
And I don't even know we're able to measure our own. And I think that that's the point, right? Is that how can we articulate this to business, that these are fundamental needs? And if somebody else has soft skills, I'm going to punch them, because it is not pro-violence, but it is this idea of these are the actual skills that matter. So the way we frame them and how we communicate them, I think, matters so much. And I love that reframe of the pat leave too, Matt or pat leave.
Totally. And something that came up for me recently too was literally the only reason we call them soft skills is because they're hard to measure, right? And those hard skills we often measure very easily. So I think it's just figuring out what those metrics are and allowing space for some of that subjectivity and even je ne sais quoi, like that thing that we can't quantify, but that is valuable for sure. Another thing I'm thinking about from, the first part of the conversation around breaks and, then throwing in that motherhood or fatherhood piece where right now people aren't really finding a lot of breaks. Like, I'm sitting 3 feet away from my couch right now, and I feel very guilty during the workday when I sit down on that couch. I'm like, no, I should be at work, right? This isn't productive. So how do we take effective breaks? How do we create space for breaks when we have no time? And then tell us a little bit about this magical thing that you just put out in the world that'll help all of us figure that out as well too.
Thanks. So the thing about breaks is every single study shown that during your day, your breaks are productive in both mental well-being and performance. So they improve performance. They're an investment in your performance. And as a former athlete, you know this. You know that part of your athletic success is being able to take active recovery. And yet we don't really meld it into our day. And if we look at like what chronic stress is, it's just the inability to recover effectively between bouts of stress. And that is so detrimental over time. So creating this effective recovery is a performance enhancer. It is your competitive advantage. And yet we don't put the same emphasis because nobody's rewarding you for taking a break. Nobody's like, you get off the soap and like, yeah, high five, like good job taking a break. But they will reward long hours. And it's almost like a lazy way to measure productivity. It's not, it is. And people still promote on it. And like, we really have to shift the conversation. But for those people that do find that guilt, I am totally like, I research it and I still have that guilt of taking breaks. Um, you're now a scientist. See how you work before and after the break, right? I want to note all breaks except media and social media are effective or null for productivity and mental well-being. Social media breaks are detrimental. And the concept really is you have not turned off that part of your brain that's on when you're working. So you haven't created effective recovery. The most effective recovery is out in nature. And if you can add a social or movement component onto that, even more so. So it's about strategizing, scheduling, and trying to play with your own productivity and how you work. I remember missing my run as I was writing my dissertation, and my dissertation was on physical activity and the benefits of it. And so, but we've just been ingrained and rewarded for so long that breaks are bad or slacking off or like, name whatever the connotation is. But there's a psychologist that studies experts. He's considered the experts on experts. And the only thing all experts have in common is how passionate and deliberate they are about their breaks. So if you want to be a high performer, this is a skill you actually have to master. And we just don't talk about it and reward it in the way that we probably should. What was the second question you had there? You asked about breaks and then something else.
Yeah, I'll quickly segue in there. We'll get back to the exciting piece for sure. But I think, there's certain things we hear and, what you're saying makes sense, but we need to hear it a bunch of different ways. I hope that, this is a reminder for some of the folks dialing in to take breaks. But for me, I was listening to a podcast and it was about, I think his name is Matt Walker, and it's Why We Sleep, a book he wrote. And that performance piece, right? Like we all admire the Michael Jordans of the world and those kinds of things. I'm watching The Last Dance on Netflix, obviously. But, when a high performance athlete sleeps 8 to 10 hours a night, we don't bat an eyelash because we're like, that's what they need to do, right? But we want to be high performance people, but we somehow pride ourselves on, I only slept 4 hours last night because I was working on this thing. Like our output's going to be crap. So, I encourage folks to find the different ways to hear that message. And one of those is a book that just entered the world. Tell us about it, Lisa.
So I just wrote and published came out on Monday. It's a Cup of Mindfulness and for the busy and restless. And it's quick ways to improve your focus. Like we all get told to pay attention. We literally exchange our attention for our jobs, for our relationships, for our kids, for our passions, for ourselves. Attention is that currency. And yet so few of us are taught how to pay attention, and it's a learned skill. And so when you're able to manage your attention, when you're able to be more mindful and to practice that, you can be much more deliberate on how you work, much more deliberate on the content you consume, the media, the streaming, the what have you, and be able to set up those habits a little bit better to serve what you're trying to do. And so with Cup of Mindfulness, it was certainly designed for the people that have absolutely no time, that have probably tried and attempted and probably failed mindfulness practices before, and it's taken advantage of the time you do have. So the concept started when I was practicing mindfulness just over my coffee in the morning. And that was the only time I could find, and I would just be coming to my 5 senses and practicing my focus essentially on that one behavior. And then it integrates a bunch of really practical strategies, like while you're in the shower, and taking that as a cue when you step in to be able to concentrate either on your breath or on your five senses or what have you. While you drive, that is mine right now. Like I said, I have two small kids. And if they're, occupied, I'm working. So in order to fit in some sanity into my life, I take them for a drive and they're quiet. And then I'm able to do some short practices. I surveyed parents on how the heck they're getting some time to themselves or doing any kind of self-care right now. And the number one answer by far was going to the washroom for long periods of time, which I had no idea. And my husband's like, yeah, I've been doing this forever. So apparently, and I called it hashtag shit meditation, because it's allowing you to build that space and time in there, and to get creative with it. Like I said, there's no time to be had. So how can we integrate, and how can we make sure that we're still getting those skills and those things that we really need? And when I talked about recovery, mindfulness is one of the best ways to create recovery for your brain. And you can do it anywhere, and you can try to fit it in. Even these small micro practices have large impact.
Awesome. As you were saying, the long bathroom trick, I'm imagining those social media memes where like the people's dog or cat follows them into the bathroom and they're never alone, so they can't even get that little bit of meditation in.
Well, so all these parents said that, and I have this great picture. I went to the washroom. I wasn't even prolonging the visit, and my son's hand is under the door. And I'm like, go to the bathroom. They said you'll have some peace and quiet. They said that's not always the reality.
Totally. So thinking about, the world we came from and the world we're currently in and the world we're moving towards, what do you think will never be the same again?
I think work is going to change. I think virtual is going to become much, much more of the norm. I'm somebody that travels extensively for business, and I'm wondering how exactly that's going to affect it. I think there's going to be a craving for in-person gatherings. So I don't think it's going to be eliminated by any means, but I think a lot more people are going to think virtual is probably the go-to, right? I know I work with cancer survivors and older people, and they're all learning how to use Zoom and zooming into their church services, or I do love that we've created some new mandate on psychological care and allowing that to be virtual. It allows people to save a lot of time, energy, effort. And for those that are intimidated to go, it becomes, in the comfort of your own home. So I think that's really positive. I do think that there's going to be a lot of shifts in everything from pay and how we're paid and how we're compensated, to how we get information. And I'm using a loose definition on that information. Food, like the delivery services have increased so much. I live in a very small town. Most places didn't have delivery. They do now, and they've integrated services. Online learning is becoming more popular. Everybody's going to have, I've been talking to a lot of universities, and they're all shifting the sense of, in September, it's probably going to be online. Yeah. And so how can we prepare professors for that? How can we prepare our students? How can we get a university experience virtually? And really trying to figure this out. I also think that there's going to be people that just never want to stare at a screen again. I know I'm one of those people where I'm struggling with how much I'm at the computer and what else I can do, and I'm really craving time away from that. So I think there's going to be really some strong, lasting results. What I've loved to see, if we can take a positive spin on all of this, is what the pressure has created in regards to innovation. So, okay, this is our new reality. We're going to have to shift, and we're going to have to shift fast. What does that look like? And seeing some really cool products and insight and thought coming out of that, that I hope it continues to exist, and that we do know that our world can shift quickly. And then, like I said, I really hope that the agility and focus training and how we use our brains, and kind of taking more note of that as we go forward, having that microscope put on it during this period of time, and what we can do to support our teams and, our people, because our people are our number one asset. And so not having them under the same roof, what does that do, and what has it done, and what can we bring back positively when we do go back to work? When we go back, excuse me, to like we're working. So when we go back to the actual office environment.
Yeah, totally. I'm always really passionate. Like one of the reasons we started Next Gen Men, and that's led to a lot of all of these other things, was, in my early 20s, I had issues with mental health. And so I'm very passionate about destigmatizing a lot of those things, and role modeling as well too. And in the spirit of Mental Health Week and all those kinds of things, like I recently started taking therapy again, but doing it virtually. And I'm saying that I'm 3 feet away from my couch, but like my couch is a pretty sweet place to do that from, right? Versus having to go somewhere and having that extra barrier. And I think that, that's something that men struggle with. So I definitely want to amplify that as well too. And then I'm thinking of, some of the lessons and the positive spin that you're talking about here, that agility piece. How do we, from a diversity and inclusion and equity perspective, like what are the lessons we should keep from that kind of worldview?
That lens.
Yeah.
I do think, again, this has set women back quite far. Unfortunately, with so little support for having to do 2 jobs at once. And to be frank, you can't do 2 jobs well at once. You're only doing 2 things poorly. And there hasn't been a lot of thought and support and innovation in that space that I've seen. And I'm so willing to hear positive stories because I would love to. And so there has to be a fix to that. There has to be more effort, time, and thought put into that, so that we can bounce back, if you will. Like we can recover from some of the damage that has been done during this time. And I think for inside the home, that is as true inside the home as it is with the company. I've noticed a few things even with my own relationship. As you know, I have a partner that is unbelievably supportive and is dad probably first, but beyond anything. But he'd get a phone call and just hand my daughter back to me, and I'd be like, "This is my time to work." And so starting those conversations, and I'm hoping offering some solutions to them too, and some insight into what both careers need and what it is to try to work together and as a team to figure that out, because it is challenging. And the number one advice we normally get is ask for help. There's no help to be asked for right now. So I think that that's a challenge for sure moving forward. I do hope it has opened a lot. What I love about this experience is seeing into people's homes and starting conversations that way. So you have a beautiful plant behind you, and I know this is because of your girlfriend and what she does for a living. And the books, I don't know who's been paying attention to the books, but I'm doing that
Great
all the
color coordination.
Thank you. And that's I want to brag about that. I also have a beautiful picture that has a swear word in calligraphy that looks gorgeous over on the side that some people will point out. But starting conversations like from that, and learning more about people, and learning more about like clients or people that you don't know very well, from getting a window into their world. So I hope that helps a little bit. Again, when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and understanding, that some of the conversations are pushed a little further, or perhaps literally doors opened to worlds, right?
That segues nicely. We have one question here, but folks, definitely want to turn it over to you if you have any questions for Lisa or myself. We have one here from Meredith. Curious to get your thoughts. You talked about how difficult parenting and working full-time has been, and flexible working hours aren't the best solution, especially for women. What kinds of solutions would you like to see employers to implement better support parents?
Okay, I don't have a perfect answer for this, but I've been really thinking about it, and this is my first insight into it. 1, acknowledge that it is hard. And so advice I've given to some of my clients is get your logo. Conveniently, their logo was an elephant. Make it a coloring page. Send it to the parents and say, here's a coloring contest, or this is for the kids. Just bloody acknowledge it. That is the lowest rung. The other thing that I think we can do is do things like, and I mean, I'm coming from a very practical standpoint here. but I'm turning some of my meetings into phone meetings so I can drive while I have them. And then they know they're taking notes during it, and then I'll get that email after. But it's a way to accommodate. Asking what the best time is to parents instead of telling them, because they're going to do everything they can to accommodate you. But if you acknowledge the fact that they are also have these little humans that need them, that say, okay, what time's best? When's nap time? Like, what time is best for you? And we'll schedule that call or that meeting or what have you. Letting parents be on mute during Zoom or during virtual conferences, and letting them know that they can do that. And if they need to answer a question, that they come back on to audio, or turning on and off the video and things like that, and encouraging it, because again, parents, most people will do whatever they can to support the culture and support the norm. So if they know they're able to do that, that makes a big difference. Flexible hours are not bad. I actually support that generally, regardless of pandemic, but it's not a full solution, right? So there's other things that we can do to just simply acknowledge, make things lives just a little bit easier. And I know, and I thought a lot about this because non-parents then take a little bit more of the load on right now, which isn't fair. None of this is fair. Nobody chose this. And I was thinking about, nobody told me when I thought about having kids that I could be quarantined with them. This was not part of the discussion. This is not like an integration into anybody's mind. So we're all doing our best. And so being able to shift some workload. And also when it comes to performance reviews, come on. We have to take this into account. There's no way about it. Like, there's no way around it. Performance reviews have to look differently this year. They also just taking a moment, again, I said acknowledge, but also like support, or like, how are you doing? Or like, going a little bit beyond just the acknowledgement, but like, what can we do? What works for you? Yeah. So just a couple ideas, but I do think this needs to be thought through a little bit more.
Totally. I like to think of it as, we've created this function within workplaces called human resources, but we really want to focus on that resources piece. We need to put that human piece back into it. And,
Yeah.
On the diversity and inclusion piece of things, we keep championing, bring your whole self to work. But your whole self has these, hangers on, your partner, your kids, your dog, all those kinds of things. And I'm really enjoying, I know on my calls right now, sometimes a kid pops up and I wave at them and I say, oh, who's this? And, acknowledge that. And then when we go back into those office settings, it's not how are things, it's, how's your partner Lou, right? And your son Max, right? Like how are they doing, right? And it becomes so much more human. And that is that inclusive piece where we show we care, and there's that psychological safety that I can show up here as my whole self.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that, again, I hope that this is a positive thing that have come from all of that. We have different generations in the workplace, and we have a period of time where 2-income families are much more common than they've ever been. And so often, I don't think some of this neglect is coming from any kind of malicious or, it's literally a lack of understanding. So if this is a period of time where people can see into homes and lives and have some honesty around what that's like, and whether it's, we keep talking about parenting, but it could be grieving. It could be, additional stress, financial stress, partners losing their jobs, you losing your job. There's so much going on here. And so to create dialogue and understanding and support, and to your point, the human aspect of business and bringing that in, I think it goes a long way. And to help people understand how to do that. Because again, I don't think it comes from being malicious. I think there's just a lack of education, understanding, and modeling when it comes to doing that and doing it effectively and still getting to those business goals, or however you're measuring your performance.
Totally. We're waiting on some other questions here, but I want to take the opportunity to kind of take what you just said and riff off something that Grant dropped here. He said, good companies tend to attract top talent, bad ones won't. I think that, in the old world, sometimes a certain salary band could maybe counteract some of that. But oftentimes when people talk about You know, I want people to know we're a good workplace and whatnot. The best thing that you can do, let me back up a sec. I was speaking with one pretty significant company and I was asking them what their D&I strategies were. And literally they said one of them was applying for awards. And I just thought to myself how kind of wrong-headed that was, that you get that third-party validation, but maybe your own staff aren't championing for you to get that award or those kinds of things, right? And so if we can create these spaces where people, like the best way to let me know that this is a good place to work is if I go to you and I say, hey, Lisa, you got to come work here. This is an amazing place. We have this role. I think you'd be a great fit. And like, I can tell you X, Y, and Z, why this is amazing. I don't know why companies aren't investing in that type of marketing these days.
And I mean, what's interesting is I was just talking to a client that's exactly how he measures it, right? Like for his own knowledge, he's like, I know we do a good job, and the reason why I know is because people keep recommending their friends for jobs. And it's true. And I think that goes a really long way. And people are doing a really great job during this pandemic and a really terrible job, and it's really going to separate those good and bad companies on how they treat their people. And again, their people are their best asset, and right now there's a lot of talent out there. There won't be for long. So those people that have gone above and beyond are going to come out of this well ahead of those that maybe didn't invest in their people, you know? Totally.
Any closing thoughts you want to leave us with? We've covered a lot of ground. We covered inequity in terms of gender and parenting in these times. We've covered proactive health. We've covered, healthy and unhealthy workplaces. What is something you want to leave us with today?
I think this concept of taking a break before you need it. So I talked about breaks and the importance of them, but part of the secret behind them is to develop the habit. And I'm using breaks as an example, but this could mindfulness, physical activity, like, connection, all these things that we have control over that help with our brain health, doing them on a habitual basis so that you actually are activating that before you absolutely need it. So you're not burning out and then being like, oh, I need a XYZ, that we integrate these, and challenging yourself to do it in a sustainable way. And what does that mean for you? Everybody works differently. There's not this magic number of breaks you need to take during the day but what works for you, and how can you integrate it so that it'll be a long-term thing well beyond COVID, and having this as being a little bit of, a little scientific experiment on how you work, how you function, and how you can take care of your mental well-being.
Totally. No, I love that. Where can people find you and Conscious Works?
So they can find me on social media at Dr. Lisa Belanger, and Conscious Works, which is my company, is at Conscious Works. Yep, we went really creative on that. And then the book you can find on Conscious Works.
Awesome. And Grant, I agree. There was a quiet group today, but hopefully next time
it was so interesting.
It was, yeah. We did a great job covering it before people even had questions. I just want to plug, you can find Equity Leaders on Twitter and LinkedIn at equityleaders.org. And we're trying to have one of these fireside chats with interesting people with interesting perspectives on a weekly basis. So I hope to see you again at a future one. Everyone take good care, wash your hands, and we'll see you on the other side of all this. Ciao.
Thank you for coming. Thanks for having me.
Bye.